Thank you, Ms. Southwell, my able public relations officer. She has had to multitask in substituting for me and also now for Mr. Williams. Thank you, Ms. Southwell. Good evening to you, those who are listening via radio, watching via television, and log on via internet. Today, I bring you the report from the NEOC. 311, we would have experienced 21 calls for the past 24 hours, 19 on St. Kitts, 2 on Nevis. St. Kitts 911 would have experienced 64 calls for the past 24 hours. NEOC processed a total of 6 calls, 1 for general information, 3 health-related, and 2 for persons seeking permission to move during the lockdown period. The EOC on Nevis, 12. Before I continue, I want to pause to wish you a happy Labour's Day, the day for the workers, when we hardworking people, you, a hardworking individual, is recognized globally. I wish to recognize you as well. So tap yourself on the shoulder and congratulate yourself for being a hard worker. Superintendent Henry, I think, spoke for me, as well as Ms. Giselle Matthews. I have been bombarding Giselle along with Mr. Satney. This week will be an interesting week for us as we seek to enforce the protocols laid out by the regulations. We are not in a vendetta to shut down anyone. All we are seeking for you to do is to play your part as a business sector to ensure that you contribute to the fight against COVID-19 in the interest of public safety. The task force is going to be tomorrow briefed early. They're going to be deployed early, and they're going to pay a visit to the business community early. The Chief Immigration Officer, Ms. Mercelyn Hughes, is the head of that compliance task force. Please contact Ms. Hughes tomorrow with any challenges that you may face. We will not compromise. We will not compromise the safety and security of our people. The quarantine task force is going to continue their operations tomorrow as well to ensure that persons who should be in quarantine and isolation are sheltering in place. So those persons who are in quarantine, please comply. Also in isolation. Let me take this opportunity to acknowledge a number of individuals who have been supporting our operations nationally. Ms. Fulton, who has been providing meals for the students who are in quarantine. Ms. Powell, who has been providing breakfast and dinner for the students, the school meal program, who has been feeding the NEOC day in, day out. Thank you to that team. Ms. Gillette Percival, who provided some refreshment for the NEOC. I've yet to drink my glass of refreshment, Gillette. Rebecca's Catering donated some corn soup to the NEOC. And for that I am grateful because I rushed came and I was a bit hungry, and trust me, I took a cup of your soup and it was wonderful. I enjoyed it. I was the first to eat. So Vesta, unfortunately, I had to eat first. I want to also acknowledge Delta Petroleum for donating a cooking gas to support the operations for the students. Also, and equally so, I was moved, and I wish to also recognize her. I was moved last night after we had a very interesting dialogue with our regional counterparts to reach home a bit exhausted and to take up my phone and read a very wonderful WhatsApp message from Dennis Christopher. It was a 3-minute prayer. 3-minute prayer where Dennis Christopher took me to another place where such a wonderful prayer seeking God's coverage over our lives. Thank you, Denise, and continue to pray for all of us. Today is the day of the worker. With your permission, I want to acknowledge a number of persons today. Let me start with the work that is being done by our medical professional. And for me, right now, our commandant is none other than Dr. Hazel Laws, Chief Medical Officer, and supported by the second commandant, who the Chief Medical Officer asked to call up the troops. Our Medical Chief of Staff, Dr. Cameron Wilkinson, who is here day in, day out. I never heard him say he wanted a day off like we. Dr. Liddy, Nurse Irish, the health planner, Mr. Bell, cleaners, orderlies, cooks, nurses, and the nurses who are led by the matron, my good dear friend, Miss Kerry Tuckett, our environmental health officers, who we don't see often, led by the Chief Environmental Health Officer, Mr. Riley. The NEOC, must acknowledge Ms. Clarissa Langley Stevens, Inspector Mitchum, Inspector John Berger, Inspector Dickinson, Sergeant Henry, Ham Radio Society, the Island Constables, Lieutenant Connor, Lieutenant Brooks, Lieutenant Watson. I further commend those who continue from the community and social development to do their work in the NEOC. I also want to commend from the utilities section, the SCELEC, led by Mr. Jomo Williams, Water Department, Mr. Charles, the cable, from my wonderful friend Pat and her team. Excellent work they have been doing. Flow, Digicel, Sol, and Delta Petroleum. I also want to acknowledge these market vendors, hotel and restaurant workers, taxi operators, our livestock and crop farmers, fishermen, street side vendors, ferry operators, the parks and beaches workers, the Public Works Department, Mr. Ron Collins and Director Cromwell Williams and their teams of engineers and masons, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, our construction workers, the St. Kitts Air and Seaport authorities, led by Mr. Don James, our port workers, airport workers, port security, service attendants. Equally so, the Evangelical Association and Christian Council has been working with us closely to ensure the maximum safety of the congregations. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, led by Ms. Kebas, who day in and day out grinds here with us at the NEOC to ensure that our diplomatical relations remains fortified. What about those persons who maintain our drains? What about these solid waste employees, from the waste collectors to the managers, who keep our environment clean? The legal staff of the Honorable Attorney General, who on weekly basis or every 2 weeks prepare the necessary legislation for us to be able to enforce public safety. The Treasury staff, while under these circumstances, go out on a daily basis to ensure that we get paid and the bills are paid. What about national security, which is led by my boss, the permanent secretary, Mr. Osman Petty? And he leads the St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force, St. Kitts and Nevis Defense Force, Her Majesty's Prison, Fire and Rescue, Immigration, NEMA, amongst many others. What about those persons who process our passports, citizenships, residencies? Information technology. And we have had the privilege to have with us on the task force Ms. Ophelia Blanchard, who has transformed the way in which we do things from the ordinary to the technological era. And of course, this cannot be done without the private sector. That's why today we have here the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Ms. Giselle Matthews, the first female president of the Chamber. Our industrial workers, supermarket workers who toil day and night to ensure that we had food, packed shelf, cleaned the aisles, and the cashiers who proceeded expeditiously to ensure that we paid and we were able to be processed and move quickly out of the supermarket. What about our bakers and the bakeries, for us who also love bread except me? The sales clerks, the cashiers, the bus drivers, security officers. What about our teachers and those bus drivers from the Ministry of Education who are driving our nurses and healthcare workers from here to there every night to ensure that our nurses are there to serve you at every health facility? I will not forget our differently able, and I want to acknowledge Ms. Mary Nurse Clark with the work that she's doing with the differently abled. We keep saying that this approach must be an all-of-society approach. If I have forgotten anyone, it's not intentional, but please note, you are all welcome and you are all important to all of us. With that said, please continue to enjoy your Workers' Day. But before I leave you, we must acknowledge as well the political directorate of the country. I want to acknowledge the cabinet, the federal cabinet of St. Kitts and Nevis, which is led by the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Timothy Harris. I also, equally so, I want to acknowledge the cabinet in Nevis, the Honorable Premier of Nevis, Mr. Mark Brantley. We must also acknowledge the leaders of the opposition, and equally so, they are a member of this process in both St. Kitts, federally, and Nevis. So to all of you, thank you for what you do for the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. So with that said, I want to thank you for listening, and I look forward for your questions.